Am fost nevoit să facem o mică modificare în agenda noastră. De asta, pauza de cafea va avea loc după următorul modul. Acum începem modulul dedicat mobilității urbane în oraș. Cumva, colegul care a pus întrebarea asta a făcut această trecere spre ce facem cu infrastructura, ce facem cu transportul, ce facem cu extinderea orașului. Orașul crește, numărul de mașini crește, numărul de oameni crește. Ce se întâmplă, cum facem față acestor lucruri? Asta ne propunem să răspundem în următorul panel. Acum, așa cum avem pe fir una dintre... Da, vreau să invit în primul rând toți participanții în acest panel. Cei care sunt pe loc, deci este Vlad Cochici, arhitect, doctor geografie. Vlad, ia loc, te rog. Și este Ana Popa, cofondatoarea Alianța Biciclete Chișinău. Și avem doi speakeri care sunt online și cu care vom începe discuțiile pe acest panel. Suntem pe fir cu Dzvenyslava TYSLYUKEVYCH din Ucraina, este coordonatorul CIVINET Ukraine, care va vorbi despre provocările de mobilitate urbană într-un context nu foarte favorabil, să zic așa, având în vedere situația din Ucraina, dar anume astfel de situații uneori stimulează, cât n-ar fi de straniu, luarea deciziilor și schimbări mai radicale și mai rapide decât în format obișnuit. Let's connect with Dzvenyslava. Dzvenyslava va vorbi în engleză, eu sper că toată lumea este ok. Din păcate nu avem traducător, dar dacă o să fie careva clarificări pe urmă, vă apropiați și o să vi le clarificăm. Dzvenyslava, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Do you hear me?
Thank you very much for waiting so long. Sorry for having this delay. I made a short introduction, and please, can you try to either screen share your presentation, or we can try to put it here on our side?
Yes. One second.
Putem să o dăm mai tare un pic?
It's here. Do you see it?
Okay, so Dzvenyslava, you can start. The floor is yours.
Okay. Perfect. Dear audience, I'm actually really glad to be a part of your fantastic urban mobility conference in Chișinău. It's an honor for us, for Ukrainians, to engage more with Moldova in this critical time for Europe, I'd say. And my presentation is really a specific one. So we will be speaking today about urban mobility challenges in wartime, how we engage in decision-making and strategies. So I will actually start from a kind of a pretext, the current context that Ukrainian cities are living in. Basically, you most likely know the whole story behind Russian invasion in Ukraine in 2022. However, not everybody understands how hard the consequences of current war in infrastructure for resiliency, for urban mobility. So basically, we have 100% closed airports and airspace besides military operations. So that means that all of our civil infrastructure for air mobility is disabled at the moment. The other thing is that I'd say somewhere between 70 to 80% of airports are also partially or fully destroyed, which will impact our further mobility recovery even harder. We also have a limited port access, so you can see Odessa in here in the bottom near Crimea, and it used to be the biggest Ukrainian port for import and exports of goods for Ukraine. It's not anymore because it's, I'd say, only used 10% of the capacity at the moment, because it's extremely hard to maintain peaceful environment for delivery of goods in there. And we had to critically reopen new ports, which is actually now a city of Chornomorsk. It's nearby Odessa, who now are working as a main Ukrainian port for international exports. We also have a partially destroyed railway systems. I'm sorry, I cannot deal with it. I will try this. We have partially destroyed railway system. This is also due to constant missile attacks, but also the drones of Russian Federation. They constantly attack specifically the interlock connections of the railway roads. So it's really hard to maintain proper connectivity within Ukraine, also for delivery, but also for the civil infrastructure. Due to that, we have an outdated mobility infrastructure. This is actually kind of a big issue because besides railway, we have still the roads, we have public transportation in cities. And what happens is that from the very beginning of full-scale invasion, most of the cities on the east of Ukraine, they were left with no public transportation because the transportation depots were destroyed again. So we need to maintain somehow the capacity to fulfill this public transportation services for the society. And this is actually due to help of our European colleagues who were helpful enough to actually give us their outdated buses. So we currently use that as a substitute for this particular time. However, even though we already have issued a standard of Euro 6 for the public transportation buses, because of this, I would say, scarcity of public transportation on the east and central Ukraine, we continue using the one received from the humanitarian aid. And there is one more bigger issue, which never would I have thought before the full-scale invasion is actually a new term. It's a decrease in cities. I hope no country will face this because this is a really difficult issue. So this is the kind of the issue that the big cities have in a vice versa connection. So for example, we have Paris, it's constantly increasing cities. So they constantly have to improve their public transportation, make it bigger, make it more sufficient, buy new public transportation modes, work with the society to improve cycling, micromobility. However, in Ukraine, due to war, there are, I'd say, more than 100 cities and towns who suffered from the severe decrease in civil society. And they would go from, for example, 50,000 to 5,000 or 200,000 to 10,000. And in the end, we have kind of a new challenge, how to update what was there adapted for 100,000 citizen city in terms of public transportation, just to serve 5 to 10,000 people, which is now basically a village, not a city anymore. And this is a huge challenge as well. And this is kind of a new question arose from that. The question is mainly, do we need public transportation at those points anymore? Maybe we need to switch to cycling more. Maybe we need to build cycling lanes, micromobility options, etc. I will go actually in the real dark side of what happened in Ukraine and how you can basically deal with it in the other scenarios that, for example, happened recently in France, Portugal, and Spain with the power outages. So basically from the 2022, February 24th, we would say that we can divide this Russian-Ukrainian war into 4 urban mobility stages, I'd say. The first crisis that happened is a rapid inflow of internally displaced people and transit citizens towards the west of Ukraine. And the west of Ukraine is pretty huge. We are connected to Polish border, Moldovan border, Romania, Hungary, Slovakia. So there is a lot of things that we had to deliver to the people who were running away in extreme fast way from war. For example, in my city of Lviv, where I'm from, we are currently at the rate of somewhere around 1 million citizens. And imagine this same city had to host up to 3 million people a day transiting my city to Europe. We had to host them, we had to feed them, we had to show them where the public transportation is, how it works. We had to somehow park enormous amount of vehicles left out on the street. And we basically had a huge crisis on the streets because people just left their cars in the middle of a road. They didn't really care about their car anymore. They just left it. And we had to deal it afterwards. I will tell you in a few minutes what we did with them. But after that, just accommodating them and telling them how to get to the train station or how to get to the border wasn't enough, actually, because there was no enough trains or buses or even road capacity wasn't that big to accommodate that amount of people. So we actually had a huge crisis connected to that. However, there is one thing that probably any country has to understand in connection of any kind of crisis, is that in the moment where everybody in the country is affected by something that cannot control, people become really, I'd say, helpful. They gather together, they try to help each other even more than before. I'd say, for example, for Ukrainians, we became really not friendly, but I'd say we became kind of a bit of a family member to each other, even though the person comes 1,000 kilometers from my home city, and we try to accommodate them as much as possible. And that helped a lot at the very beginning, just to kind of understand how to help the people, how to make their lives a bit slightly better in this transit moment. So this is what we did in the city hall and in all the public administrations. There was no organization at the very beginning. I'd say there was a moment of 2 days after the beginning of the full-scale invasion when everybody was kind of out of normal. Because we weren't sleeping that much at the very beginning. Somewhere there, we actually decided to call each other, the colleagues of ours, and just ask, do you need me anywhere? Like, do I need to do anything? And usually the colleagues had the point of, yeah, I need you in this central railway road, or I need you nearby the city hall because we are receiving the first humanitarian aid, or I need you somewhere in the border of the city, because this is one more challenge that arose, is that every single big city were becoming kind of a fortress at the moment, because every single outing of the city, the main roads, they were closed with the border, kind of, because we had to control the possibility of Russian military going inside of the city. So we were trying to check all the passports and all the people. So it actually established a second crisis. The second crisis was basically a huge, enormous car influx on the outsides of the city that basically stopped the whole roads, and people were staying in the same roads for, I don't know, almost half a day just to transit to outside of the city. For that reason, actually, we did a really smart solution, because in the city of Kyiv, happily, we never stopped providing public transportation services to the citizens. And we continued providing the public transportation until the kind of this internal border roads, and then we had re-established another public transportation route just outside of the border, so people were crossing on foot, which was much faster, and we did it basically in 1 day. So this is one of the solutions. However, I need to insist that from my CIVINET experience, having a lot of Ukrainian cities members, this is not the case for every single city. It happened in Lviv particularly just because we had the biggest amount of people incoming to the city. However, for example, in the city of Chernihiv, which is on the right to the city of Kyiv, just bordering Russian Federation and Belarus, they had a totally different scenario happening. At the same time, we were receiving internally displaced people. They were temporarily occupied by Russian Federation. So that's what happened in their city in the few first days. They literally disconnected all of the public services, all of the public transportation services, because the city was occupied. And for example, the director of the transportation company who provides the public transportation electric trolley buses in the city of Chernihiv, he was personally fighting for his city first, before in 3 weeks after, he could actually restart providing public transportation services in his city after the occupation. There was another kind of crisis that happened simultaneously with the internally displaced people and the border problem and occupation. That was actually a fuel crisis. The first 2-3 weeks, I'd say even up to 2 months, we had almost no fuel in Ukraine. Because in the first days, people started to fuel their tanks in the car like crazy, and we were out of fuel. And because the previous port, the main port of Odessa, was already, I would say, too hard to maintain at the moment, because it was a huge fight point during the war, we had no fuel resources for a few weeks. And due to that, a lot of cities had to cut the capacity of the public transportation in half, in 1/4. Everybody had a different scenario. And also most of the cities who had trams or trolley buses or even e-bus, they switched fully to e-public transportation. That helped a lot. Also, the second thing that happened with the fuel that is obvious, this is on the screen, the price doubled in a few days. That actually also did kind of a huge problem for the civil society, but also for the military, because in the first few weeks we had established kind of an unspoken rule that everything comes to the military first, and then what is left, it goes to the citizens, because we need to maintain the country first, and then we can deal with the rest of the problems. So this is basically what happened at the very beginning. We used electric alternatives. However, this is going to be funny and not funny at the same moment. We had a third, I'd say, crisis: electricity outages. So imagine Ukrainians having no fuel, providing no public transportation services to the citizens, thinking that electric transportation systems are actually the only solution, and we are stuck with no electricity. Basically, none of the electricity. We were left with no electricity for a few hours, up to a few days. In certain cities and towns, we actually had no electricity for up to 2 weeks. And we had to actually switch somehow back to fuel buses. At the moment, it actually was somewhere around the second month till the 6th month of full-scale invasion. And actually due, again, to humanitarian aid, but also due to re-establishment of a new port in Chornomorsk in a really rapid way, we were able to provide at least basic amount of fuel to military, but also to public transportation specifically. So we were kind of lucky already to re-establish the connection for delivering of fuel, which is extremely important. And then there is one more funny thing to say. Pre-2022, Ukraine was in a huge surplus of electricity. Just a funny example to that, Ukraine was one of the, in top 3 countries actually to have a Bitcoin mining status, because that was so cheap to have electricity in Ukraine. It was almost for free, that people from all around the world were coming to Ukraine to do a Bitcoin mining. And then basically in a few months, we lost most of our capacity to provide electricity, and we never went back to a total surplus yet. However, I also must say that, as I said at the first slide, there was kind of an enormous capacity coming from the civil society in connectivity, getting together, helping each other. And this is also the case for the public workers, specifically the electricity professionals and electricity workers who were able in some ways actually to recover the connection from the main cities after the missile struck or drone struck or some kind of other military operation happening in Ukraine just in few hours. So for example, for the city of Lviv, again for the best, we maximally had the power outage for 8 hours. But at the same time, in the city of Odessa, which was the biggest port before restart of the Chernogorsk, Odessa actually had the same outages for almost 2 weeks because Russia was constantly missiling hit the same spot after every electrician actually did their work. And for that reason, actually, a lot of people unfortunately died during the works, trying to provide electricity back to the people. And there is the final crisis that happened is the safety and security crisis, which is connected to fuel lack, electricity lack, what I said before, having borders established in every single city. This is actually connected also to cybersecurity because from the very beginning of full-scale invasion until now, constantly all Ukrainian public systems, banks, services, everything like that, it's constantly imposed by the Russian hackers trying to disconnect some services, make it disappear, etc. So we actually had to re-establish a few things in Ukraine. So the first thing that you see on the right is actually introducing autonomous batteries to every single traffic light in every single city. This was extremely important because at the very beginning it was kind of self-regulated, especially during the power outages, but now we are more or less safe in every case of scenario. The second thing, we actually had to establish a so-called cybersecurity army. This is basically a cybersecurity hackers, but from our side, who make our security system for public transportation, but also for the other services safe. And there is one more thing that we had to re-establish, I'd say, and install is the speed cameras with face detection. I know that in Europe it's a really, I'd say, a bad solution because face detection is regulated by the GDPR, and you cannot track any kind of face recognition technical data. However, in Ukraine, we must do it because we must recognize now who is crossing the city. We already had a few cases actually finding, I'd say, big Russian military figures crossing Ukraine by car using this monitoring speed cameras. And also by actually introducing this kind of face detection cameras, we were able to provide safety for the citizens, not in the case that we were sought of. Actually, there is kind of a normal scenario happening during war in every single country. So when war is happening in the country, you have a really big increase in the criminality in every single city. The bigger the city, the bigger the criminal activity is. This is totally normal. It's correlated because there is weapons in use that you cannot control that much activity anymore. Police is very, I'd say, stuck with their other things to do, and it's really even hard to get a call to the police. You can sometimes spend 30 minutes to 1 hour to just get a call to the police. But then introducing face detection cameras actually helped to solve us so many small and medium crimes in Ukraine, and that actually helped us already on the second year of war to maintain the same level of safety it was pre-war. And my city was basically almost the safest in Ukraine. So it was really good to introduce that. There are solutions to all of that, actually. Not to everything, because you never can be prepared to war. You can never be prepared too much to power outages, but you can always be prepared and try to work fast to help in the future. So one of the solutions, for example, in Lviv, but this is happening everywhere in the West Ukraine, is actually introducing of the rehabilitation ecosystems. We need to help our civil society and military coming from all around Ukraine by a drone or a missile or even just a Russian soldier to rehabilitate as fast as possible. And actually in the city of Lviv again, we have a great example of actually introducing a new public transportation lane specifically delivered between the main railway station towards the rehabilitation center. So in the picture, you can actually see that we have this is a new tram route. It's already partially employed. It will be soon fully introduced by the beginning of 2026. And because of having the need to create rehabilitation centers, you also have second need, actually making everything that is possible to be accessible and inclusive. This is actually what every single country can work already on, because making every single public transportation point, public transportation stop, introducing no stairs, having really well-kept environment for the people on the wheelchairs is crucial, because right now we have to redo it in a really fast speed. You probably all know that in the Soviet times, there was no people on the wheelchair. There were no people having some kind of troubles with their body or mind. We were all healthy and doing good. It's not the case. It never was. And right now is the only time when Ukrainians actually realized how important it is to reintroduce people who suffered war to the environment. So this tram route will be 100% inclusive in every single spot, starting from the railway station to the city center to the rehabilitation, and every single route there is also going to be inclusive and accessible. I would say it's already is. However, we still need to introduce the train route till the end, so it's a bit too early to say, but everything in connection is already there. And there is one more thing to understand actually here. Because of a full-scale invasion, all of the resources in the country come specifically to the war-related and military activities. So you cannot spend money for doing a park, and a nice ecosystem, a business environment, etc., in every single city. However, actually, thanks to a good public authorities decision, the second thing that we can spend money on is actually making inclusive and accessible solutions, which is extremely good, because this is the only thing that is now provided in Ukrainian cities, making everything accessible and inclusive. There is a second thing that's kind of a priority solution for Ukraine right now. Pre-full-scale invasion, we became a part of a TEN-T corridor, and Lviv, Kyiv, it used to be Mariupol in there. We hope it's going to be back soon, and it's also going to be in the map again. However, it actually helped us a lot being in the TEN-T, but also during the big times of crisis, to understand how important delivery of goods, transportation, and basically being the main transit corridors of goods as a city of Lviv is. So our biggest priority, besides providing inclusivity and accessibility for everybody, is actually developing kind of transit corridors, transit centers, on-site ports around the cities, so we can actually really be fast in delivering goods and services inside and outside of Ukraine. And for example, just it's now a fourth year of full-scale invasion, and within this 3.5 years already, we were able to establish 4 huge delivery and transportation hubs around the city of Lviv, and this is the same that happened basically everywhere on the west of Ukraine. There is one more thing connected to transportation and delivery. We still talk about transportation of people and civilians. Again, thanks to humanitarian aid, we were able to get a lot of kind of outdated trams and buses. However, still, as I said before, you must imagine that the situation was there is either no public transportation or there is an old public transportation from Europe. It's always better to have some kind of transportation. And there is actually good because the EU, even old public transportation, mostly is adapted to inclusive needs. So for example, in this writing, we have 12 Tatra trams, 11 Vavey trams, and 21 Schindlers. And within all of that, only the Tatra trains are not inclusive. So all of the rest are inclusive. So we can fully use them within the rehabilitation needs, within the city center, nearby the railway. So it's actually really good that we constantly have this kind of help from EU. This is actually a reminder to be together with EU, to stay connected, because in the times of crisis, they are the only one who will help you. And it's really good to establish this kind of bonds in advance, so you will receive the help you need, or you will give the help they need before it's too late. There is one more priority that, as I said before, it's exclusion and accessibility, and there is a lot to say actually here. As I said before, the trams that we received, most of them, they are inclusive. Most of Ukrainian cities, even though it's still a wartime, they introduced e-ticketing system in the cities, because we now need to somehow fuel, in brackets, fuel our budgeting, because there is no budget for anything basically. We need to somehow have this real white money that are not in the gray economy anymore, to increase the capacity of our public transportation to have a possibility to procure new public transportation modes. And this is actually the only thing that helps, is actually having clear e-ticketing system everywhere in Ukraine. I'd say that only in around 2 last years, more than 15 cities in Ukraine established e-ticketing. There is more, 30 cities more to establish e-ticketing in the next 1 year. So this is actually also really crucial to know. Besides that, as I said before, having inclusive and accessible everything around is also really, really important. There is, for example, a picture on the bottom that you can see having a man on a wheelchair, and below him you can see that the cobblestone roads are actually not kind of covered in some gray tints. It's actually because we kind of need to re-establish all of our old cities with the cobblestones to being accessible and inclusive. And we did a really simple solution that can be useful everywhere in the world, basically kind of filing them in the same level. And after you file even 2 meters of route everywhere in the city center of the city, you can actually get 100 accessible city. And the same happened with stairs, etc. I will be trying to finish soon. It's almost my last point. There is actually one more really important thing to know. Having a sustainable urban mobility plan before the full-scale invasion. All the cities who had that before the full-scale invasion, they are now having a great possibilities to continue their development, even without the finances and budgeting from the central government, because they already have a specific strategy for 5-10 years. And even now, for example, here on the right, there is a picture of having traffic jam around the city. And this is specifically, for example, the routes where we will continue establishing transportation lane specifically for the public transportation on every major route in Lviv. And again, we talked with a lot of CIVINET members around Ukraine, and everybody around them, they all say the same: having sustainable urban mobility plan, even in the times of crisis, even where you probably have no budgeting and kind of no possibilities, helps a lot, because you still are kind of keen to make the public transportation more adaptable and suited for the civil society. And actually having just a sustainable urban mobility plan intact, even during the times of crisis, help you still to work on the European projects, exchanges, study tours, pilot some solutions. So this is extremely crucial, and we'll continue saying that SAMP is a core of everything in your public transportation. And the last but not least, Euro integration and advocacy. This is actually a CIVINET, and where we are located in Ukraine right now. We were only established last year in August in Ukraine, and it was really nice to know that there was kind of a shortage of mobility network in Ukraine. And having a mobility network that organizes mobility professionals, expert in transportations, it helps so much to understand the smallest problems, to exchange contacts, to get to know the people, to get to know the actual solutions. There's, for example, a really famous case, which I will continue talking on. On the top up near the Kiev blue arrow, you have actually a Chernihiv located again. So this is an extremely nice example of actually being a resilient city. So, as I said before, they were occupied for almost 3 weeks during the beginning of a full-scale invasion, and they were left with no public transportation at all. However, pre-full-scale invasion, they had this 100% outdated public transportation in forms of old yellow marshutkas going around the city in between 10 a.m. and 7 p.m. with no good itinerary, with no service, basically not inclusive, basically nothing, and especially no e-ticketing system. So what they decided actually to do in the moment when they realized they need to somehow reestablish public transportation routes back to the civilians, even though Chernihiv was a decreasing city, and they decreased 3 times from the amount they've been just at the beginning of a full-scale invasion. So what they did, they did a revolutionary thing in Ukraine. For example, there is a public service obligation law. It's enforced in all European Union. This is the reason why we have really great transportation all around Europe. However, public service obligation, PSO, is not introduced on a national level in Ukraine. And what Chernihiv did, they introduced it against Ukrainian law just in the city of Chernihiv. And due to that, they were able to reinforce public transportation in just under 2 years, having 200 new fleets, public transportation buses, trolley buses, bought by the public transportation operators, the private one, because they were all interested in the PSO. So this is a huge revolution for us, and this is the case that actually right now, during our advocacy events around Ukraine, what we try to do is actually talk a lot with the Ministry of Transportation, of Infrastructure, and actually make them introduce PSO on the national level, because it's extremely crucial and it helps a lot. PSO is kind of the second key after the SAMP. And this is basically it. If you have any questions, I will stay on the line. Thank you.